Victoria Chen had everything except the one thing money couldn't buy: someone who would love her for who she truly was, not what she owned. At 34, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech empire sat in her penthouse overlooking Manhattan, scrolling through her phone with a heaviness in her chest that no amount of success could lift. She had been on 17 blind dates in the past year, each one arranged by well-meaning friends who swore they'd found the perfect match. But every single man had looked at her designer clothes, heard about her career, and suddenly transformed into someone performing for her approval. Their eyes would light up with dollar signs, their compliments would ring hollow, and their questions would subtly probe into her wealth and connections. Victoria was tired of being seen as a prize to be won, rather than a person to be known. So she made a decision that would change everything. On her next blind date, she would pretend to be broke, struggling, barely making ends meet. She would wear thrift store clothes, claim to work multiple minimum wage jobs, and see if anyone could look past the surface to find the woman underneath. It was a test born of desperation and loneliness, a final attempt to find something real in a world that felt increasingly fake. If you believe in kindness, real love, and second chances, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything. The first 3 dates after her transformation were disasters. The men who had seemed interested suddenly found excuses to leave early. One actually told her she should be more ambitious. Another suggested she was wasting his time. Victoria's heart broke a little more with each rejection, but she pressed on, determined to prove to herself that genuine people still existed somewhere in this city of endless ambition. Then she met Daniel Morrison at a small coffee shop in Queens, far from her usual haunts in Manhattan. He arrived 10 minutes late, apologizing profusely while juggling a worn backpack and a coffee-stained folder. Daniel was a 36-year-old elementary school teacher and single father to 7-year-old Emma, whose mother had passed away from cancer 3 years earlier. He wore a simple button-down shirt with a small stain on the collar that he'd clearly tried to hide, and his shoes were old but carefully polished. There was a tiredness around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless worry, but when he smiled, it was genuine and warm. Victoria, dressed in faded jeans and a simple sweater from a thrift store, told him her rehearsed story about working 2 jobs to make rent, about struggling to afford groceries, about dreams deferred because survival came first. She watched his face carefully, waiting for the moment he would make an excuse and leave like the others had. But Daniel's expression didn't change to disappointment or disdain. Instead, his eyes filled with understanding and compassion. He reached across the table and gently placed his hand near hers, not quite touching, offering comfort without presumption. He began to share his own story without any shame or self-pity. He spoke about the medical bills that had devastated their savings, about working summer school and tutoring on weekends to provide for Emma, about shopping at food banks and wearing the same 3 outfits to work because new clothes meant less money for his daughter's needs. But he also spoke about the richness of small moments. Emma's laughter when they made pancakes for dinner because it was all they could afford. The joy of finding books at library sales. The beauty of free concerts in the park. Daniel didn't see poverty as a character flaw or a reason to judge. He saw it as a challenge that revealed what people were truly made of. As the hours passed, Victoria found herself forgetting about her test entirely. She was simply enjoying the company of a man who listened when she spoke, who asked about her dreams not to evaluate her worth, but because he genuinely cared, who shared his own vulnerabilities without expecting anything in return. When she mentioned she was worried about making rent, Daniel didn't offer empty platitudes or distance himself. Instead, he quietly wrote down the name of a food bank and a community center that had helped him, treating her struggle with the dignity and respect it deserved. If this story is touching your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, and share this video. These small actions help us reach more people who need to hear stories of real human connection. They began seeing each other regularly, always at free or cheap locations, walks through Central Park, picnics with homemade sandwiches, evenings at his small apartment where Emma would show Victoria her drawings and they'd watch old movies together. Victoria met his daughter and felt her heart expand in ways she'd never experienced. Emma was bright and kind, wearing hand-me-down clothes with pride and sharing her toys without hesitation. Daniel was teaching his daughter that wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts but in generosity of spirit, and it showed in every aspect of their lives. 3 months into their relationship, Daniel did something that shattered Victoria's carefully constructed test entirely. It was a cold November evening, and they were walking through his neighborhood when they passed a homeless veteran sitting against a building. Daniel stopped, reached into his wallet, and pulled out a $20 bill, one of only 3 bills Victoria could see in his worn leather wallet. He handed it to the man along with information about a shelter, speaking to him with respect and genuine concern. Victoria stood frozen, watching this man who struggled to feed his own child give away money he desperately needed because someone else needed it more that night after Emma was asleep. Victoria sat with Daniel in his tiny living room and finally told him the truth. She explained who she really was, about the test, about the loneliness that had driven her to such desperate measures. She waited for anger, for betrayal, for the relationship to shatter under the weight of her deception. But Daniel simply looked at her with those kind, tired eyes and said something she would never forget. He told her that he'd suspected something wasn't quite right about her story from the beginning, that her hands were too soft for the hard labor she claimed to do, that her vocabulary and bearing suggested a different background. But he'd fallen for her anyway, not despite the mystery, but because of the person he saw beneath it, someone kind, someone searching, someone lonely just like him. If this story has moved you, please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Have you ever felt unseen for who you truly are? Your words might inspire someone else today. Victoria and Daniel married the following spring in a small ceremony at the park where they'd shared their first picnic. She'd offered to pay off his debts, to provide everything he and Emma could ever need, but Daniel had asked for something different. He asked that they use her resources to help other struggling families, to create scholarships for children who'd lost parents, to fund programs that supported single parents trying to build better lives. Together, they established the Emma Morrison Foundation, named after the little girl who had shown Victoria what real family looked like. The CEO, who had once sat alone in her penthouse, now came home every evening to a modest house in Queens, to a husband who still taught elementary school because he loved it, and to a daughter who called her mom and drew pictures of their family that hung proudly on the refrigerator. Victoria had finally found what she'd been searching for all along, not someone who passed her test, but someone who had helped her realize she'd been asking the wrong questions. Love wasn't about finding someone worthy of your wealth. It was about finding someone who showed you that the truest riches had nothing to do with money at all.